May 9th, 1941. North Atlantic, aboard HMS Bulldog. Waves crushed against the hull, and the wind whipped salt into the eyes of Lieutenant Commander Norman T.R. MacLeod as he scanned the dark horizon. The night was thick with fog, punctuated only by the white caps of the Atlantic swells and the occasional wake of unseen vessels. On the bridge, sonar operators tapped furiously, listening for the faint hums and clicks that betrayed the presence of German U-boats. Somewhere beneath the rolling darkness, a deadly hunter prowled the HMS 110, a Type IXB submarine commanded by Captain Lieutenant First Julius Lem. Below the ocean S-surface, the crew of HMS 110 moved with military precision. Engine hums and metallic clanks echoed through the tight compartments. Lem, alert despite exhaustion from days at sea, consulted his navigation charts, noting the convoy coordinates reported via Enigma. His officers carried out drills, checking torpedo readiness and monitoring pressure gauges. For the men of the Kriegsmarine, the Atlantic was both battlefield and cage a theatre of deadly skill, where a single misstep could mean instant death. Suddenly, the distant thump of depth charges resonated through the hull. The U-boat lurched violently. Lem barked orders, sending men scrambling to battle stations. Sonar reported a destroyer in pursuit. The Allies had spotted them. Below deck, First Watch Officer Oberleutnant Zussi Hans Hageman tried to maintain calm, shouting above the rising panic. Torpedoes ready, secure all hatches. Every man understood that this was the fight for survival, and yet none could anticipate the dramatic turn that would follow, a turn that would alter the course of naval intelligence forever. On HMS Bulldog, Captain Joe Baker Cresswell directed his crew with calm efficiency. Ahead full, depth charges, stand by. The destroyer S-radar and ASIC operators triangulated the U-boat S position, guiding the ship closer with methodical precision. The tension was palpable. The Atlantic was a dark void, and each second could spell life or death for both hunter and hunted. A flash of gunfire illuminated the waves as the HMS 110 surfaced unexpectedly, battered by the assault. The U-boat crew scrambled to man deck guns, desperately trying to defend themselves. Lem realized the position was untenable. With grim determination, he gave the order to abandon ship. Sailors leapt into the frigid Atlantic waters while officers attempted to scuttle sensitive materials. Amid the chaos, a British boarding party, led by Sub-Lieutenant David Balme, braved gunfire and plunging waves to reach the submarine. They moved with practiced urgency, knowing that behind every hatch lay the potential for a prize of unprecedented value, the Enigma machine and accompanying codebooks. Inside HMS 110, the scene was chaotic. German sailors struggled with scuttling charges and water flooding the lower compartment. Balme and his men, faces tight with concentration, raced against time. Their goal was singular: seize intelligence before the submarine sank entirely. They retrieved cipher material, rotors, and codebooks, carefully cataloguing each item as the water rose around them. The operation was perilous, each second bringing the threat of explosion, gunfire, or submersion. Yet by dawn, the boarding party emerged victorious, clutching the key to breaking Kriegsmarine communications. As the U-boat sank beneath the waves, Lem and surviving crew were taken prisoner. In the hours and days that followed, the German sailors grappled with the realization that their secure communications might have been compromised. Yet the depth of Ultra-S reach remained largely unknown to them. Officers whispered theories, debated how much the Allies had learned, and attempted to reconcile their defeat with the professionalism of their own operational planning. They did not understand that the Enigma machine captured on HMS 110 would enable the Allies to decode countless messages, shaping convoy routing, submarine hunting, and the broader outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. For the British, the significance of the capture was monumental but shrouded in secrecy. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park, working under the cover of night and strict confidentiality, pored over the rotor settings and cipher sheets. Each breakthrough in decoding meant more lives saved at sea and more losses inflicted on the Kriegsmarine. Yet the sailors on HMS 110 remained unaware of the scale of the intelligence disaster they had suffered. To them, it was a harrowing capture. To the Allies, it was the opening salvo in an unseen war of minds and machines. The tension of Atlantic night waves crashing, men shouting, hatches slamming, and explosives primed was more than a tactical encounter. It was a turning point in naval warfare, an intimate moment where courage, fear, and technological advantage intersected in the dark waters between Britain and Germany. The HMS 110 and her crew were then to the annals of history not just as a lost vessel, but as the unwitting source of intelligence that would give the Allies a decisive advantage in the Battle of the Atlantic, reshaping the calculus of submarine warfare for the remainder of the conflict. May 11th, 1941. Scapa Flow, Orkney Island, Scotland. The captured crew of HMS 110 was herded onto the decks of HMS Bulldog, their hands bound and faces pale from cold, fatigue, and shock. The Atlantic wind bit at their uniforms, and each man's gaze was drawn to the churning waters where their submarine had vanished. Captain Lieutenant Fitzjulius Lemp, still struggling to comprehend the rapid loss of his vessel, maintained a rigid composure. Yet beneath the surface, a storm of uncertainty and fear brewed. What had the British taken from them? How much of their most guarded secrets had been compromised? On the Bulldog bridge, Captain Joe Baker Cresswell oversaw the processing of prisoners and the careful handling of captured materials. The Enigma machine, codebooks, and cipher sheets were secured and transported below deck, away from prying eyes. Intelligence officers worked quickly, photographing and cataloguing every document. Each rotor, plotboard setting, and page of codes was a puzzle piece that, once deciphered, could unlock the operational heart of the Kriegsmarine. For the British, the moment was a triumph, yet it demanded absolute secrecy. News of the capture could never reach the German command lest they adjust their encryption and nullify the breakthrough. Below decks, the German sailors whispered among themselves, their voices a mix of fear and speculation. Did they get the machine? Asked one young officer, his voice trembling. Lemp, silent and controlled, only shook his head. "We may never know," he murmured, "but I fear they hold more than we can imagine." Despite the captured stoicism, the crew could sense the gravity of their loss. To the Germans, the Atlantic remained a battlefield, but now an unseen vulnerability had been exposed to breach in the supposedly unassailable communication network of the Kriegsmarine. Across the waters, the broader implications of HMS 110's capture began to crystallize. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park meticulously dissected the rotor settings and message keys. Mathematicians and linguists worked in tandem, decoding the once impenetrable Enigma signals. Within weeks, the intelligence gleaned from the submarine allowed Allied convoys to anticipate U-boat positions, avoid ambushes, and direct anti-submarine warfare operations with unprecedented precision. Each decoded message, each predicted course, was a life saved and a U-boat neutralized, though the Germans remained unaware of the full extent of the breach. The captured crew underwent interrogation in strict accordance with Geneva Conventions, though British officers probed for technical insights. Lemp and his men offered little, adhering to the rigorous discipline instilled by the Kriegsmarine. They described standard operation procedures, patrol patterns, and torpedo mechanisms, yet no direct acknowledgement was given of the critical Enigma materials lost to the enemy. For them, the loss was tactical, immediate, and devastating, but its strategic ramifications would unfold largely unseen and unknowable from their perspective. Meanwhile, back in Germany, rumors of HMS 110's capture circulated through Kriegsmarine channels. Officers debated the implications and issued warnings to submarine crews: be vigilant, assume all messages might be intercepted, and exercise extreme caution in operational planning. Yet, without concrete proof, the magnitude of Ultra-S penetration remained invisible. Most German sailors, even when cautioned, never realized that every convoy, every maneuver, every intercepted communication might already have been compromised through the materials seized from HMS 110. For the British sailors, the success of the operation was bittersweet. Sub-Lieutenant David Balme and his boarding party had risked life and limb in frigid waters, facing the possibility of scuttling charges, flooding compartments, and gunfire. Their bravery had secured not just a submarine, but the key to altering the naval balance in the Atlantic. Every detail of the boarding, from opening hatch after hatch to salvaging rotors and codebooks, was etched into memory as both harrowing and historic. As night fell over Scapa Flow, Lemp and his men were confined to temporary holding areas. They shared quiet conversations, pondering the fate of their comrades lost with the submarine, the perilousness of the Atlantic campaigns, and the possibility that their codes were no longer secret. The Atlantic, which had been a familiar theatre of skill and danger, now felt like a theatre of betrayal where the invisible hand of intelligence had struck decisively, yet silently. In the weeks that followed, the operational impact of the capture became evident. Convoys were routed with fewer losses, U-boat attacks faltered, and British destroyers hunted submarines with near-prescient accuracy. Each success reinforced the hidden influence of ultra-intelligence derived from HMS 110. For the Kriegsmarine, the tactical routines continued, but the invisible erosion of their communications undermined the very foundation of their Atlantic operations, a secret that would remain largely unknown to the crews who once manned the proud Type IXB submarine. October 30th, 1942. Mediterranean Sea, off the coast of Egypt. The sun had barely risen when HMS Petard, a British destroyer, cut through the waves, leaving a foamy wake behind. Lieutenant Commander Colin Grazier stood on the bridge, binoculars trained on a shadow that rippled beneath the morning light. There it was, HMS 559, a Type fake submarine commanded by Captain Lieutenant Hans Heidmann. Intelligence suggested the sub carried highly valuable Enigma materials, and Grazier knew that seizing them before the submarine could submerge or scuttle was critical. Below deck, Heidmann's crew moved with routine efficiency. Diesel engines hummed, compartments were checked, and torpedoes were inspected. There was a faint awareness of danger. Convoys in the Mediterranean were increasingly well defended, but the men trusted in their training and the perceived security of their encryption. They could not know that the Atlantic had already taught the Allies lessons they were now prepared to exploit. The attack came swiftly. Depth charges from HMS Petard exploded in the water, sending shockwaves through the submarine. Crew members were thrown against bulkheads, instruments rattled violently, and alarms blared. Heidmann ordered a crash dive, but the damage inflicted by the initial depth charges slowed their descent. Water seeped into compartments, and men struggled to maintain balance as pressure alarms signaled the urgency of the situation. Grantley's boarding party, led by Sub-Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able Seaman Colin Grazier, prepared for a perilous maneuver. They knew the submarine was compromised, but moving quickly could yield the same intelligence gold as HMS 110. Small boats were lowered into the choppy Mediterranean waters, and the men rowed with grim determination, aware that exposure meant near certain death if the sub sank prematurely. Inside HMS 559, panic began to ripple through the ranks. Heidmann ordered scuttling procedures, attempting to destroy the cipher materials. Crew members rushed to flood compartments and detach critical equipment. Fasson and Grazier, undeterred by the imminent danger, leapt aboard the partially flooded submarine, climbing hatches and navigating corridors slick with seawater. Every step was measured, every second precious. Their target was the Enigma machine and accompanying codebooks. Fasson reached the communications room, water rising around his knees, and grabbed key documents before the submarine sank further. Grazier assisted, passing materials up or through hatches to their small boat. Tension was suffocating. The slightest misstep would mean loss of life and intelligence alike. Yet through discipline and courage, the team succeeded in salvaging the codebooks, laying the foundation for new ultra-breakthroughs in Mediterranean operations. Meanwhile, Heidmann and surviving crew were rescued or captured by British forces. In captivity, they faced confusion and anxiety about the loss of their submarine and the potential compromise of their codes. Rumors circulated among prisoners that Ultra might have gained a foothold in naval communications, but most did not grasp the depth of the intelligence breach. Like the crew of HMS 110, they would only speculate on the strategic consequences of what had been taken from them beneath the waves. Back on HMS Petard, Fasson and Grazier handed over the codebooks and Enigma materials to intelligence officers. The meticulous cataloguing began immediately, and the documents were rushed to Bletchley Park. The Codebreakers work intensified with each day. Decrypted messages revealed U-boat patrol routes, convoy locations, and planned attacks. The Mediterranean theatre, previously fraught with peril for Allied shipping, became navigable with unprecedented foresight. Lives were saved, ships were redirected, and the cumulative impact of these captures reinforced the silent war waged in card rooms and decoding chambers far from the front lines. The human element remained striking. Fasson and Grazier, soaked and exhausted, reflected briefly on the peril of their mission. Every second mattered, Grazier muttered, catching his breath. Fasson nodded, eyes distant. They understood that courage alone was insufficient. Timing, precision, and nerve had dictated success. Without their daring action, the codebooks might have been lost to the deep and the Allies' Mediterranean strategy compromised for months. For the captured German sailors, the loss was devastating but largely opaque in its implications. Discussions among prisoners revolved around operational miscalculations, the risks of Allied patrols, and the dangers inherent in Mediterranean deployments. Few could imagine that the very communications they considered secure were now decipherable by the enemy, that ultra-intelligence was shaping every move of their counterparts, and that the outcome of naval engagements had been subtly but decisively altered by a handful of men braving near certain death for documents and machines. By the nightfall of October 30th, HMS 559 had sunk beneath the waves, her crew captured, and her codebooks secured. The capture would go down in history as another pivotal moment in the secret war of intelligence, a demonstration of bravery, timing, and the enormous leverage gained by deciphering the seemingly unbreakable Enigma. The Allies now possessed the keys to decode not just one submarine-esque messages, but the operational heart of the Kriegsmarine in the Mediterranean, setting the stage for a new phase in naval warfare that would tilt the balance of the oceans in their favour. November 15th, 1942. Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, England. The corridors of the code-breaking centre buzzed with quiet intensity. Analysts hunched over desks cluttered with sheets of paper, rotor settings, and partially decoded messages. The air smelled faintly of ink, solder, and the mechanical hum of bomb machines clicking rhythmically in the background. Alan Turing, John Tiltman, and a cohort of mathematicians and linguists moved with urgent precision, aware that every decrypted Enigma message could mean lives saved or lost across the Atlantic and Mediterranean theatres. The materials recovered from HMS 110 and HMS 559 formed the backbone of a new wave of ultra-intelligence. Each page of cipher keys, every rotor configuration, allowed the analysts to predict U-boat patrol routes with unprecedented accuracy. Convoy routing changed overnight, with Allied commanders receiving near real-time intelligence on the locations of wolfbacks, enabling preemptive evasive maneuvers and targeted anti-submarine attacks. The shadow war had shifted dramatically from brute force and gunnery to subtle mastery of information. Meanwhile, in German POW camps, the crews of HMS 110 and HMS 559 remained unaware of the full extent of their loss. Discussions among prisoners often lingered on minor tactical defeats, bad luck, or human error. Lemth and Heidmann, even in private journals, speculated about possible compromises but could not fathom that the Allies were reading their encrypted communications daily. The depth and precision of ultra-penetration remained invisible to them, a hidden hand guiding the course of naval engagements far beyond their imagination. At sea, the consequences of these intelligence victories became visible in stark contrast. Convoys that had once been vulnerable to sudden, devastating U-boat attacks now passed through contested waters with fewer losses. Destroyers and corvettes intercepted wolfbacks before torpedoes could find their targets. Merchant ships, shielded by both escort vessels and intelligence, moved through the Atlantic and Mediterranean with an unexpected confidence. The Kriegsmarine, relying on its historically secure Enigma system, remained unwittingly exposed, sailing into a network of foreknowledge that altered every engagement. The human element was strikingly evident. Sub-Lieutenant David Balme, able Seaman Colin Grazier, and Sub-Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, men who had risked their lives boarding sinking submarines, became unsung heroes in a war that depended as much on intellect as on artillery. Their daring actions were recorded meticulously but kept secret under the Official Secrets Act, ensuring that the Germans never discovered the crucial breach in their communications. Meanwhile, Bletchley Park analysts worked around the clock, decoding messages, testing hypotheses, and constantly refining methods to exploit the captured Enigma materials. Back on the ocean, U-boat crews noticed a subtle shift in fortunes. Patrols that had once succeeded with impunity now faced seemingly uncanny awareness from British forces. Attack attempts were thwarted, wolfbacks disrupted, and losses mounted. Capit and lieutenants and officers speculated, whispered, and blamed each other for failures, unaware that the true source of Allied superiority was not superior numbers or tactics, but knowledge, the secret decoding of their supposedly secure communications. The paradox weighed heavily on those who understood it. For the British, the capture of HMS 110 and HMS 559 had unlocked the Kriegsmarine secrets, providing the Allies a decisive edge while remaining almost entirely invisible to the enemy. For the Germans, the Enigma had been a symbol of invulnerability, a fortress of codes, yet its compromise undermined their confidence, their operations, and ultimately their effectiveness at sea. The Shadow War, fought in intelligence offices and code rooms far from the front lines, was shaping the fate of thousands of sailors, the course of entire campaigns, and the strategic balance of the Atlantic and Mediterranean. At Bletchley Park, analysts reflected on the human courage intertwined with mechanical genius. Without the bravery of boarding parties risking life and limb, the theoretical advantages of code breaking would have remained out of reach. The combination of frontline daring and cryptographic brilliance created a force multiplier that reshaped naval warfare. Convoy commanders receiving decrypted messages acted with a confidence born of unseen insight, redirecting ships, timing evasive maneuvers, and coordinating anti-submarine sweeps with an efficacy that confounded the German Navy. In the prisoners' quarters, limp Heitman and their men continued to speculate on the Allied advantage. Some blamed chance, others suspected espionage, but none could guess the scale of the compromise. The codebooks they had failed to destroy, the rotors that had been salvaged from sinking submarines, had opened a Pandora's box that would quietly dictate the outcome of engagements for months. Each patrol now sailed under a shadow they could neither see nor understand, their fate increasingly determined by the intelligence harvested from their own hands. By the end of 1942, the pattern was unmistakable. Convoys were safer, U-boat attacks less devastating, and the Kriegsmarine increasingly frustrated by apparent Allied presence. The secret triumphs of Ultra, enabled by the capture of U-110 and U-559, demonstrated that information could willpower equal to firepower, and that courage in the most dangerous circumstances could shift the balance of an entire theatre of war. The shadow of Ultra stretched unseen across the oceans, shaping battles, saving lives, and quietly rewriting naval history. January 1943. Harkham, United Kingdom. Captain Lieutenant Fritz Julislem had been dead for more than a year, lost when U-110 was abandoned and ultimately scuttled, but his former crew still wrestled with fragments of understanding. For those who survived, whispered rumors of code compromise began to circulate, igniting anxiety and speculation among the prisoners. Even in captivity, sailors clung to fragments of operational pride, unwilling to fully concede that the Enigma, device many considered unbreakable, might have been exploited. Oberleutnant Hans Hegemann, seated on a wooden bench in a small hut, shared his fears quietly with fellow officers. They intercepted something, he said, fingers tracing the edge of a tattered notebook. Perhaps our patrol orders, maybe even our codes, but to what extent, we cannot know. His words were tentative, uncertainty gnawed at the edges of Kriegsmarine confidence. Every convoy loss seemed now tinged with suspicion, and every intercepted message by the Allies hinted at an invisible enemy reading their moves. Yet without concrete evidence, the vast majority of U-boat crews never realized the true scale of the Ultra breakthrough. Meanwhile, back in Germany, Naval Command issued general warnings to submarine flotillas: be cautious, assume messages could be intercepted, and verify codes regularly. The directives were precautionary, but they lacked specificity. No mention was made of the critical captures of U-110 or U-559, and the Enigma machine's integrity was largely assumed. Officers debated the advisability of procedural changes, but the scale of the compromise remained unseen, hidden behind layers of secrecy and Allied counterintelligence. At sea, new patrols of Type Vic and Type Roman 9 submarines continued missions in the Atlantic and Mediterranean. The crews, disciplined and confident in their training, navigated minefields, evaded destroyers, and coordinated wolfpack attacks. Each patrol seemed routine, yet increasingly, outcomes were shaped by unseen intelligence. Convoys that should have been easy targets were intercepted by escorts in positions that seemed uncanny. Commanders attributed success to luck, strategy, or skill, but the silent hand of Ultra was now guiding the Allied response with precision. In the intelligence offices of Bletchley Park, Codebreakers noted the efficacy of their efforts. Decoded messages from U-boat communications informed convoy scheduling, submarine interception, and tactical planning with a reliability that seemed almost prophetic. Analysts worked tirelessly, knowing that each breakthrough could save hundreds of lives, redirect ships away from danger, and subtly erode the Kriegsmarine's operational confidence. Yet the human cost of secrecy remained palpable. The men of U-110 and U-559 had perished or been imprisoned, unaware that their sacrifices would have an outsized impact on the course of naval warfare. On board Allied vessels, sailors gradually sensed a shift in the battle at sea. Convoys that previously fell prey to surprise attacks now navigated more safely, and the losses of merchant shipping began to decline. Escort captains remarked on the uncanny precision of their tactical deployments, while German U-boat crews grew increasingly frustrated by foresight that seemed beyond explanation. Sub-Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, able Seaman Colin Grazier, and Sub-Lieutenant David Balme, heroes of the Atlantic and Mediterranean, were largely unknown to the sailors who benefited from their actions, their names immortalized only in the quiet corridors of Bletchley Park. The The paradox of the ultra-advantage became increasingly clear. The power to read the enemy was as decisive as any gun or torpedo, yet entirely invisible to those whose operations were being compromised. For the German officers who survived U-boat captures, partial hints of compromise bred caution, fear, and superstition, but never full understanding. The Allies had created a chessboard in which every move of the Kriegsmarine could be anticipated, reshaped, and countered, while the opponent remained largely oblivious. By mid-1943, a subtle psychological erosion began among U-boat crews. Confidence in Enigma, previously unshakable, wavered. Patterns of failure that had once been dismissed as misfortune or Allied cunning now hinted at deeper exposure. Yet the extent and method of the breach remained a mystery. Every encounter at sea, every thwarted attack, reinforced the growing uneasy shadow that the sailors could sense but not comprehend. The secret war of intelligence had become a ghostly presence, a force more powerful than the Atlantic currents themselves. Spring 1943. Atlantic Ocean. Convoy HX-229. The cold sea spray stung the faces of the crew aboard HMS Leamington as they scanned the horizon for the telltale silhouettes of U-boats. Captain William Hunter, binoculars pressed to his eyes, tracked what appeared to be faint periscopes bobbing in the distance. Intelligence had predicted this encounter hours in advance, and every maneuver the escort flotilla executed was informed by ultra-decrypts derived from the captured Enigma materials. The difference was profound. The Allies were no longer reacting blindly, they were anticipating, planning, and executing with near-perfect foresight. Below the waves, Type Vic submarines prowled, unaware that their communications had been compromised months earlier. Captain and Lieutenant A.H. Top, patrolling with UMS 552, relayed routine messages back to headquarters, confident that operational secrecy remained intact. Orders were transmitted with the assumed security of Enigma encryption. Yet each message was a thread in a tapestry the British could read, unravel, and exploit. Convoys were redirected, hunter-killer groups dispatched, and U-boat movements counted before an attack could materialize. The psychological and operational advantage of intelligence was absolute but invisible. At Bletchley Park, analysts celebrated small victories in quiet rooms. Every intercepted message confirmed the enduring utility of UMS 110 and UMS 559's codebooks. Mathematicians traced rotor positions, linguists predicted message formats, and the entire process functioned like a vast, silent orchestra shaping the Atlantic theater. Submarine losses began to mount, not due to numerical inferiority, but because Allied forces now had a window into what the German Navy considered its most protected communications. For the German Navy, the pattern of misfortune was both confusing and demoralizing. Officers like Kiteman and surviving UMS 559 crew had experienced the capture firsthand, but the broader implications remained hidden from the majority. Reports of convoys evading wolfbacks, unexpected counterattacks, and losses of previously invincible U-boats created a fog of suspicion. Commandos questioned training, technology, and even luck, but none could pinpoint the true cause, the intelligence gold seas from their own vessels. The strategic ramifications extended beyond individual battles. Ultra-intelligence allowed the Allies to plan large-scale operations with confidence. Convoys were reinforced, Mediterranean supply lines were secured, and the Battle of the Atlantic, previously a struggle of attrition and uncertainty, shifted toward calculated control. Admirals like Sir Max Horton relied on decoded intelligence to optimize deployment of escorts, schedule aerial reconnaissance, and anticipate U-boat wolfpack formations with unprecedented precision. The Axis, meanwhile, sailed into an unseen network of knowledge that eroded effectiveness without ever fully revealing itself. The human cost remained intertwined with the operational impact. Sailors who relied on ultra-intelligence credited it to skillful planning and luck, unaware of the bravery that had secured the critical Enigma materials. Fasson, Grazier, Balme, and countless others had risked everything in dangerous boarding operations. The acts of valor were invisible to most, yet their consequences rippled through the Atlantic and Mediterranean theaters, saving hundreds of lives and ensuring the safe passage of crucial supplies. German naval officers continued to speculate on the anomalies in outcomes. Some posited that Allied cryptography had improved, others blamed intercepted radio chatter, and a few whispered about betrayal or espionage. The truth that the very devices and codes they had trusted implicitly were in enemy hands remained hidden. Even months later, the surviving U-boat crews, operating under the assumption of secure communications, unknowingly exposed themselves to calculated ambushes and convoy defenses orchestrated with knowledge their commanders could not fathom. As summer approached, the consequences of ultra-intelligence became increasingly evident. Convoys traversed the Atlantic and Mediterranean with fewer losses, U-boat wolf packs were fragmented and misdirected, and the strategic balance of naval warfare shifted. This silent advantage gained from capturing UMNS 110 and UMNS 559 demonstrated that knowledge, courage, and the meticulous exploitation of intelligence could alter the trajectory of an entire theatre of war, often without a shot being fired. By late 1943, historians would later reflect on this period as a turning point. The courage of a few sailors, the brilliance of codebreakers, and the meticulous application of ultra-intelligence had begun to turn the tide against a formidable Kriegsmarine. While the U-boat threat would persist, the psychological and operational dominance afforded by knowledge derived from captured Enigma materials had irrevocably changed the calculus of naval warfare. What had begun as isolated captures became the foundation for a sustained, invisible campaign that shaped the course of World War II at sea. October 1943. Bletchley Park, England. In the dimly lit rooms filled with the constant hum of war machines, the human toll of intelligence work was ever present. Analysts worked in shifts that blurred days into nights, decoding messages that held the lives of sailors, soldiers, and civilians in the balance. Among them was Mavis Lever, a linguist trained in German, who carefully examined every intercepted transmission, her eyes scanning for inconsistencies and patterns. Each message is life, she whispered to herself, aware that a single mistake could cost ships and crews thousands of miles away. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic and Mediterranean, sailors aboard Allied convoys felt the subtle effects of intelligence brilliance without ever seeing it. Captain William Hunter of HMS Leamington reflected on how his orders had seemed almost preordained. The wolf packs that had once caught convoys by surprise were now met with prepared formations, preemptive, evasive maneuvers, and carefully positioned escorts. He never knew it was the result of bravery hundreds of miles away in freezing Atlantic waters or the work of meticulous codebreakers who decoded every rotor and flubber of captured Enigma machines. The stories of those boarding parties who had seized UMNS 110 and UMNS 559 were still circulating in whispered circles, though heavily classified. Fasson and Grazier, both recognized posthumously for their courage, were remembered for the extraordinary risk they undertook, entering sinking U-boats while water rushed in around their feet. Their actions were extraordinary in the immediate sense of bravery, but they were equally crucial in the larger, strategic sense. The codes and materials they salvaged became the linchpin of ultra-intelligence, allowing the Allies to dominate U-boat tactics in the Mediterranean and Atlantic. In contrast, the German prisoners of war, including Heidemann and other officers from UMNS 559, wrestled with partial understanding. Rumors of Allied interception of their communications reached them only in fragments. "Perhaps our messages are compromised," one officer speculated quietly to another. But how deeply we cannot know. Their lives were caught between hope and fear, caught in the invisible web of intelligence that they had unknowingly enabled through their capture. Each conversation, each speculation, carried the weight of uncertainty that could never be fully reconciled. The human stakes of intelligence extended even further. Convoys carrying food, munitions, and supplies to Britain were safeguarded by ultra-intelligence, directly affecting the civilian population during the Blitz and shortages across Europe. Every decoded message meant a safer journey, fewer lives lost at sea, and more sustained support for a war effort on land. The bravery of a few men boarding U-boats, combined with the tireless work of mathematicians, linguists, and naval strategists, created a chain of human courage and intellect that reverberated far beyond the battlefield. Back in Bletchley Park, Alan Turing and his colleagues continued to refine their techniques, knowing that the Kriegsmarine would eventually change procedures, introduce new rotors, and adjust operational methods. Each advancement in codebreaking required renewed creativity, collaboration, and dedication. The human element, the analyst's focus, the boarding party's courage, the sailor's discipline remained central to the success of the Ultra program. It was a war waged in shadows, in minds and machines, where the stakes were measured in lives, ships, and strategic advantage. In German camps, conversation shifted from immediate survival to strategic reflection. Some prisoners speculated about Allied capabilities, about espionage, and about the reasons for convoy successes that seemed inexplicably present. But the invisible nature of ultra-intelligence meant that the full truth remained elusive. Lacking knowledge of the codebooks salvaged from UMinus 110 and UMinus 559, they could only imagine that luck, superior tactics, or minor errors in command had shifted outcomes. The reality that the intelligence from their own hands had been turned against them remained an unspoken, unknowable truth. These human stories, the bravery of boarding parties, the tireless work of codebreakers, the disciplined vigilance of sailors, and the frustration of captured German officers painted a vivid portrait of the complex interplay of courage, intellect, and chance. It was a war fought not just with guns and torpedoes but with human will, ingenuity, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. The sacrifices and efforts of these individuals, often unrecognized publicly at the time, became the unseen gears that turned the tide of naval warfare in favor of the Allies. Early 1944. North Atlantic, convoy route stretching from Liverpool to Murmansk. Captain Edward Fraser of HMS Silo observed the dark silhouette of a U-boat periscope cutting through the waves in the pre-dawn gloom. The escort group had anticipated its presence, guided by ultra-intelligence. Every maneuver, every depth charge was calculated with a precision that seemed almost prophetic. For Fraser and his men, the sense of foreknowledge was uncanny. The Atlantic, once a domain of peril and uncertainty, had become a stage where Allied knowledge often dictated the terms of engagement. Back in England, at Bletchley Park, the intensity of code-breaking reached a fever pitch. Analysts had long since exhausted the immediate benefits from UMinus 110 and UMinus 559 captures, but the ripple effects endured. Each decrypted message informed not only convoy routing but also larger strategic decisions, the timing of amphibious assaults, the allocation of naval resources, and the targeting of German U-boat bases. The intelligence harvested months earlier continued to shape operations with remarkable accuracy. The Kriegsmarine, however, remained largely in the dark. Officers like Hans Heitmann and the remaining U-boat crews noticed increasing anomalies, attacks thwarted despite careful planning, losses in areas previously deemed secure, and convoys seemingly anticipating their moves. Discussions of luck, tactical errors, and Allied ingenuity circulated, but the true cause ultra remained invisible. The psychological weight of this invisible threat eroded confidence, subtly undermining morale, while the operational edge gained by the Allies steadily accumulated. In ports across Britain, Allied commanders acted on ultra-intelligence daily. Convoys reverted with almost surgical precision, escorted by destroyers and corvettes deployed exactly where U-boats were expected. Supply lines that had once been tenuous were reinforced, supporting both the home front and the advancing armies on the continent. The success of these operations was built on the foundation laid by daring men like Fasson and Grazier, whose courage in boarding sinking U-boats had secured the codebooks that made such foresight possible. The human cost of these victories, however, remained poignant. Fasson and Grazier had paid with their lives, diving into waterlogged UMinus 559 compartments to retrieve documents moments before the submarine sank. Their actions were recorded in intelligence logs and quietly honored, yet the full public recognition would come only decades later. The bravery highlighted the interplay between human courage and intellectual effort, a partnership that became the cornerstone of Allied success against the Kriegsmarine. In Germany, officers who survived encounters with British intelligence began to whisper about the growing pattern of Allied foresight. "They know where we will be," one officer muttered to another aboard UMinus 123. How do they know? The question lingered unanswered, shrouded in frustration and fear. No German commander could imagine that the seemingly unbreakable Enigma, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, had been compromised by a few audacious acts of valor and the tireless work of codebreakers thousands of miles away. The strategic implications extended well beyond individual convoy engagements. Ultra-intelligence allowed the Allies to allocate naval and air assets more efficiently, reduce unnecessary losses, and plan large-scale operations with confidence. The intelligence gap created by the captures of UMinus 110 and UMinus 559 had given the Allies an enduring advantage that influenced the timing of operations, the distribution of forces, and the overall temper of the naval war. Every decoded message, every anticipated movement, reinforced the psychological and operational dominance of the Allies, even while the enemy remained largely oblivious. By mid-Minus 1944, the lessons of these captures had crystallized. Intelligence was no longer merely a support function, it had become a decisive weapon in its own right. The courage of boarding parties, the ingenuity of codebreakers, and the discipline of naval commanders combined to create a force multiplier that transformed the nature of naval warfare. Ultra, born from the bravery and intellect of a few individuals, now dictated the rhythm of the Atlantic and Mediterranean campaigns, shaping outcomes that would resonate through the remainder of the war. The shadow of Ultra stretched far and wide, unseen yet profoundly felt. Every Allied convoy that reached port safely, every U-boat thwarted before it could strike, and every decision made with confidence drew strength from the daring acts of those who had risked everything to secure the secrets of the enemy. In the silent corridors of intelligence, the long shadow of UMNS 110 and UMNS 559 loomed large, a testament to courage, ingenuity, and the transformative power of knowledge. Late 1944. North Atlantic, between Iceland and the Azores. The wind whipped over the rolling waves, and HMS Blanket, a Royal Navy destroyer, cut through the cold, grey sea. Lieutenant Commander Robert Whittaker gripped the wheel tightly, eyes flicking from radar to horizon. Submarines were becoming increasingly rare in these waters, their wolfpack shattered by months of coordinated action guided by ultra-intelligence. Yet the tension never fully subsided. Every shadow in the swell could conceal a U-boat, every blip on the radar could herald danger. The Kriegsmarine, battered and beleaguered, continued to operate with the confidence of a fading fleet. Officers like Captain Lieutenant Erich Top still commanded patrols with skill and courage, but the rhythm of the Atlantic had changed. Convoys seemed to anticipate their moves, escorts arrived with almost prescient timing, and the cumulative effects of ultra-intelligence rooted in the catches of UMNS 110 and UMNS 559 exacted an invisible yet devastating toll. Across the Atlantic, Bletchley Park remained a hive of activity. Mathematicians, linguists, and naval intelligence officers worked tirelessly, ensuring that decrypted messages reached convoy commanders in real time. The value of the codebooks salvaged by Fasson, Grazier, and Balme could not be overstated. Each document, each key, provided insights into German operational planning that allowed the Allies to dominate the seas without engaging in blind combat. Every decision made, from routing convoys to deploying hunter-killer groups, flowed from the human courage and intellectual labor intertwined in the Ultra program. For the German sailors, the frustration was palpable. Patrol after patrol ended with unexpected losses or failed attacks. Reports to Naval headquarters catalogued the anomalies convoys appearing when none should be, escorts intercepting them with almost uncanny accuracy. Officers speculated on possible espionage, the involvement of spies, or sheer luck, yet the true cause remained hidden. They could not know that the very machines and codes they trusted implicitly had been captured and turned against them, that their own hands had unknowingly sealed the fate of their operations. The operational impact was profound. By late 1944, Allied naval forces had established a near-complete dominance of the Atlantic and Mediterranean supply routes. Merchant shipping losses had dropped dramatically, the flow of material to the front lines became more reliable, and the cumulative effect of ultra-intelligence accelerated the collapse of German operational effectiveness at sea. The daring actions of a handful of British sailors months earlier had cascaded into a strategic advantage that reshaped entire theatres of war. Yet, the human element remained central. Captain Whittaker, observing his convoy moving safely under the cover of intelligence-informed escort strategy, reflected on the bravery of those who had made it possible. "We owe this to men we may never know," he murmured. Each decoded message represented not just calculations and analysis, but the lives of men who had risked everything for the chance to seize the keys of a secret war. The legacy of their courage permeated every successful operation, every averted ambush, and every life saved. In German POW camps, officers pieced together fragments of understanding. Some began to suspect that Allied capabilities exceeded normal intelligence work, yet the full extent of the compromise remained elusive. They could sense the invisible hand guiding operations against them, but were powerless to trace it. For most, Ultra remained an unknowable phantom, a force that dictated outcomes in ways they could neither counter nor comprehend. The war at sea was entering its final phase, but the echoes of UMNS 110 and UMNS 559 continued to reverberate. The intelligence harvested from those perilous boarding operations had given the Allies a decisive advantage, one that extended beyond the immediate tactical victories to shape strategy, morale, and the operational tempo of entire campaigns. Courage, ingenuity, and meticulous analysis had combined to create a hidden yet decisive force, one that had silently rewritten the rules of naval engagement and forever altered the course of World War II at sea. Spring 1945. London, England. Bletchley Park was quieter now. The war in Europe was drawing to a close, but the impact of months of painstaking codebreaking and intelligence exploitation resonated throughout naval operations. Senior officers gathered in briefing rooms, reviewing final convoy reports, submarine engagements, and operational successes. The shadow of Ultra had stretched across the Atlantic and Mediterranean, guiding the hands of commanders, saving lives, and gradually eroding the power of the Kriegsmarine. In the background, the stories of individual courage persisted. Anthony Fasson, Colin Grazier, and David Balme were remembered not as names in a file, but as embodiments of audacity and selflessness. Their actions aboard UMNS 559, diving into a sinking submarine to recover Enigma materials, became legendary within the intelligence community. Without them, the chain of insight that had allowed Bletchley Park to crack complex codes, anticipate U-boat movements, and safeguard convoys might never have existed. Their courage had transformed the abstract labor of code-breaking into a decisive strategic weapon. Across the Channel, German officers continued to process the devastation of their fleet. By May 1945, the Kriegsmarine was effectively neutralized, its U-boats either sunk or surrendered. Many survivors, including those who had witnessed the captures of UMNS 110 and UMNS 559, reflected on the unseen hand that had guided Allied operations. Some speculated, few understood, and none could fully appreciate the scale of the compromise. The Enigma, once considered inviolable, had been turned against them, reshaping the course of naval warfare and sealing the fate of countless men and vessels. The Allied victory at sea was therefore as much a triumph of human intellect and bravery as of firepower. Ultra-intelligence demonstrated that knowledge could be as decisive as any gun or torpedo. It transformed the nature of warfare, showing that carefully harvested information, combined with courage and precise execution, could alter outcomes on a strategic scale. Every convoy that reached port, every merchant ship saved, and every wolfpack forwarded bore witness to the combined effort of boarding parties, codebreakers, and naval officers operating in concert. Historians would later reflect on this period as a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. The captures of UMNS 110 and UMNS 559 were not isolated events, they were catalysts that allowed the Allies to dominate the seas, preserve critical supply lines, and maintain the operational tempo necessary to launch large-scale offensives across Europe. The seemingly invisible war of intelligence had, in reality, been one of the most decisive campaigns of World War II. The legacy of these events endured beyond the immediate conflict. The principles demonstrated courage in extreme danger, meticulous exploitation of information, and coordinated strategic application became foundational lessons in military intelligence. Modern naval strategy, cryptography, and intelligence operations all trace lineage to the daring acts of those British sailors and the tireless work of Bletchley Park analysts. They had shown that a small number of determined individuals could shape the destiny of entire theatres of war. In London, memorials and quiet commemorations honoured the lives lost and the sacrifices made in the shadowed corridors of naval intelligence. Anthony Fasson, Colin Grazier, and David Balme were remembered as heroes who had understood the stakes and acted with unwavering resolve. Their bravery, coupled with the analytical genius of the Codebreakers, illustrated the profound impact individuals can have when courage and intellect intersect. As the Atlantic waves continued to roll, carrying the remnants of a global conflict toward peace, the lessons of Ultra remained etched in history. The invisible war, fought in boarding parties' courage and codebreakers' intellect, had reshaped the nature of combat. The Allies' ability to foresee, anticipate, and control outcomes transformed not only the Battle of the Atlantic, but also the very understanding of modern warfare. The captures of UMNS 110 and UMNS 559, once mere footnotes in naval records, had become the linchpins of victory, proof that knowledge, bravery, and the relentless pursuit of understanding could triumph over even the most formidable enemy. The sea, sullen and vast, held echoes of courage, intellect, and sacrifice. Every safe convoy, every thwarted attack, and every decisive maneuver traced back to the audacity of a few brave men and the unseen power of ultra-intelligence. Their legacy was not only in victory, but in the enduring truth that in warfare, as in life, courage and knowledge together can change the course of history.